Hello everyone and welcome back to Abundantly Minimal. My name is Sarah and today we are talking about why you are getting stuck with decluttering. And I've got a different take on it than some of my previous videos. In this recent time frame, we're going to be doing a lot with different decluttering hacks and mindset shifts and secrets to help you push past some of the reasons you've gotten stuck with decluttering. I know in our previous video we talked about financial guilt and how we can move on from that. So I will leave that up in the cards and linked below if you're interested. But today we're talking about a really helpful mindset shift that I think can apply to most items. And that is that there are two different sides to every item that we have. And we want to ideally find that middle ground point in between. What are the two sides? Well, the two sides are the real, actual use and the ideal use. When we're making our decisions about what to declutter, these are often at odds with one another. We haven't found that sweet spot in the middle where the ideal use or our goal for use is how we're actually using the item. Those are not the items we're ever wondering about letting go because we found that happy medium. Often where the struggle comes from is when we have both sides at once. It's sort of like that expectations versus reality thing. Or even if you've seen pictures of food on restaurant menus or restaurant Instagram pages, of course the food is looking perfect and perfectly staged. All the ingredients are there. There's no shortcuts. It's amazing. But then what do you actually get when you order? It often doesn't look nearly as good or maybe even remotely close at all to what the picture suggested it would. And so that's the kind of mindset we have here. We've got items where we have an ideal goal for their use, but then there's the reality of where are they currently being stored? What am I actually doing with them? Am I actually going to use them? This kind of taps into that fantasy self idea I've talked about in the past. But with these two sides, I think the number one goal is to reconcile them and find that happy medium where you are happy with how you are using the item in your space, or you have found a compromise between the ideal use and what actually works for you. I think this is best illustrated with a lot of different examples, but I'm hopeful that through hearing about these examples, this is going to help you start drawing those connections in your own space when you're thinking, should I get rid of it? And then what are the two factors at play? Let's jump into some examples, shall we? The first example could be with photos, whether they are printable or digital. What is the ideal use for photos that you're taking? How do you wish to preserve those photos and potentially showcase them? What is that ideal? For some people, they want to put together a scrapbook or some sort of photo book. Others want to put these photos up on the wall. Others just don't want to lose the memory. But what's the reality? Chances are a lot of these photos are either on a device somewhere, maybe not backed up, so they're also at risk, or maybe they are in bins of printed photos that haven't been dealt with in a long time or looked at. We've got two extremes here and we have to figure out what is going to be the happy medium. How do you wish to ideally store your photos in a way that is realistic for yourself? And that's where you've got to wrestle with that and also decide, is that a priority to focus on? And maybe what baby steps can I take within that particular type of clutter? Another example could be with kitchen appliances or kitchen gadgets. Let's say you've been thinking about getting, insert the name of a kitchen tool that you've been thinking about getting. Maybe you want to upgrade a food processor, or you're thinking if you want a stand mixer, maybe you want to upgrade your coffee making setup. There's so many different types of appliances and, things that can sit out on the counter of your kitchen. And I think sometimes those things are not necessarily used all the time. Reflect for yourself. What's the ideal use? When you purchased a certain kitchen appliance, what did you intend to use it for? Did it live up to that? What's the actual use of it? Has it gotten used? Did it not work so well and you decided not to use it again? Or maybe it worked great, but just the cleanup was a nightmare. Think about what the actual situation was and then come to terms. What is that middle ground between the kitchen appliance? Is it worth keeping? Could you modify it in some way to make it more user-friendly? I know in our situation, we do have a food processor that we don't use all that often, but I found my biggest roadblock to using it was actually because it was tough to get to at first. Now it gets its own shelf on a cabinet right above where we use it, so that's no longer a roadblock for me to actually use it. What modifications can you make to your schedule, to your space, to make something potentially more useful to you, or decide maybe it's not even necessary and you move on from that? Next up, entertaining. I know that this can really range a lot. I know personally, I view entertaining very positively. I like having people over. It does usually serve as a good motivator to clean everything before people come over. But also I enjoy hosting, I enjoy making food, I enjoy playing board games and, different entertainment activities like that. But the reality in my life is that we don't have that many people over. I feel like I don't live that close to a majority of my friends, and with my family, we often kind of meet like at my parents' house. The people aren't really coming over here that often. And that is something that is important to think about as I wrestle the idea of what's the ideal setup for how I'd like to entertain, or the items I'd have for entertaining purposes. And then what's the reality is that people don't really come over that often. And there's ideals of, I would love to, this would be so much fun to do with the right people. But those ideal people, for whatever that situation are, don't actually live close at all. So the odds of them coming over are so rare that it's probably not necessary for me to keep certain elements. So think about that when you're going through finding that middle ground of the balance between the ideal and what's real and what's more realistic going forward. Another good example of this is with resources that could be disposed of, but you kind of want to reuse them or upcycle them. There's the ideal use and then there's the real use. So I know for me, I am going to be recycling this, but I saw this sitting out on one of our kitchen desk areas with the intention of reuse, and it's been about a month at this point, so I don't think it's going to get reused. This was just a tin of matcha. I am not very brand loyal. I often just buy what's on sale between a few that are quality brands of matcha. I love it. I'm not going to stop anytime soon, but one of the containers I had came with this metal tin, and so I thought, I could reuse this, or I could put I could dump out the tea from the next package into the metal tin. But I realized that was, that fantasy self, that ideal self who would want to use that. Reality is that this has just been sitting for a month on our little extra desk surface area in the kitchen. And I don't anticipate using it at this point. I also sometimes feel like if I was to transfer the matcha that I currently have in a package into here, I'd probably spill some, and then that's wasted. And also, this is much more annoying to store in the fridge because it's a way bigger package. I can't easily tuck it in the condiment and other area of the fridge where I keep the bag. So it's not even like it's user friendly. This company made a choice to have this metal tin. It is recyclable, which is cool, and I think that's just what I need to do. So the idea here, of course, everyone's going to come to their own conclusions based upon their own types of items and their own use of things. But just because you could repurpose or upcycle something doesn't mean you have to, and it doesn't mean that it's actually a practical use of the item. Sometimes it's best to just move on. So that's my example of this, and I need to do it myself. So those are just a few different examples of how we want to try to bridge the gap between the ideal and the real in our lives to figure out what that happy medium is. I think it's also important to note that the happy medium is not always going to be in the center. Sometimes it's going to be closer to the ideal side if it's maybe a bigger value of ours or a priority of ours. And I think it's also important to remember that some of these decisions take time and detailed reflection. You're not going to come up with a snap decision at each time you declutter an item or reflect about decluttering an item. So I encourage you to take that time if you need. There's no prize here for the person who declutters everything first. It's really all about your personal journey and finding that balance. As I mentioned at the start today, I am currently making a variety of different videos helping us see some of our belongings differently when it comes to decluttering. I'll actually leave that financial guilt video right here if you want to check that out from last week. And you can also subscribe to the channel up there if you haven't already done so. I'll see you next time. Bye.